Hi everyone, welcome to another Concord and Victory interview, and today we're here with author Rhian Tracey.
Our first question for you is what first drew you to writing, and when did you realize it was something that you wanted to pursue?
So I thought everybody was writing. I didn't realise that I was unusual in that. I thought everybody went home from school and started writing stories and plays. So I've been writing from a young age, although probably it wasn't very good until I'd practiced a lot and got a lot better. But what drew me to writing was that my dad would always make up stories. So he never read to us from a book. He would always just sort of make them up out of his head. And he had these sort of characters that we returned to, and it featured him, his older brother, and his younger sister. And most of the stories were about them getting up to all kinds of things that they shouldn't. And so I experienced sort of oral storytelling from a really young age. And my mum would take us to the library and just let us roam and get loads of books out, and always really encouraged reading at home. And I was in all kinds of drama groups. So I was just sort of filled with stories and lucky to have been brought up in Wales and just had this sort of culture coming at me from all angles of, music and theatre and pantomimes. And I listened to audiobooks to fall asleep to. So I was kind of saturated in stories.
Okay, thank you. Second question, could you tell us a little bit about your first writing experience and what was it like trying to get your work initially published?
Yeah, so I didn't know anyone in publishing. I didn't have any contacts. I had no idea how the business worked at all. All I knew was I liked writing stories. And I had written a novel and sort of rewritten it and rewritten it. And I knew I needed to test it on somebody. And I was in Brackley at Magdalen College, where I used to teach. And I had a year 9 class, and I thought I'm going to test it out on them. So I pretended that I'd printed it off the internet and I'd just written the first chapter. And I read it to them at the end of a day when they had worked really hard. And they really enjoyed it and they wanted the next chapter. So I ended up sort of rewriting every single weekend and refining a chapter that I would read to them the following week. And I read it really slowly over the term, and it sort of got better and better each time I rewrote it. And then at the end of that academic year, it was a year 9 class, so third form, a boy at the back of the class said, "Oh, where can I go and buy that book that you've been reading to us?" And I don't know about you two, but I'm rubbish at lying. So I went really red and started stumbling over my words. And he said, "Did you write that, miss?" And I said, yes, sort of bracing myself for them to all go, "Oh my God, it was awful. You should never do that again." And he said, "Oh, yeah, it was all right," which obviously, from a teenager is high praise. So I thought, okay, what do I do now then? And they were all saying, "Oh, go and get it published, miss." And I just didn't know how you do that. And I was reading Harry Potter, maybe like the second book at the time. So there were no films, no computer games. It wasn't the big deal it is now. But I just thought, oh, this is a good book. I like this. Who's published this? And if you turn a book and look on the spine, so like this one here, you can see who's published it. And so Harry Potter was published by Bloomsbury. So I thought, I'm just going to send Bloomsbury like the first 3 chapters of my book and see what happens. And I didn't know that you do not do this in publishing. It's like a massive no-no. And you have to go through an agent, and publishers get really huffy about, randomers like me sending in their work because they haven't got time to read it. They have time to read what comes through an agent that they know is going to be halfway decent. And so when they get these sort of unsolicited manuscripts, they just put them on what they call the slush pile. I had no idea about any of this. And someone was walking past the slush pile, and my book, my 3 chapters was on the top, and they picked it up and started reading it, and they really liked it. And then they went and handed it to the chief editor there, who's called Emma Matthewson, who happened to be Joe Rowling's editor, the writer of Harry Potter. And she sent me a letter to my home address in Brackley and invited me to London. And so I went and got the day off school, and I went down to London, and she offered me a 2-book deal, which was just crazy. And then a bit later, she offered me another 2-book deal. So that's how I got my break in publishing. It was really fluky and off the slush pile with no agent, having no idea what to do in the world of publishing at all.
Oh, that's excellent. So since you just mentioned that you're also an English teacher, what role do you think creative writing plays in a child's education and also personal development?
Huge. So we're born for stories. That's the first thing you experience as a baby, is somebody telling you a story, somebody telling you an anecdote. If you're lucky, somebody reading to you from a board book, someone singing you a nursery rhyme. So we're literally breathing in stories from a really, really young age. And it's how we make sense of the world as children and then as adults. And so creative writing has been squeezed out of the classroom. And it's really challenging for teachers when they're juggling the extreme demands of a curriculum to try and fit creative writing back into English, or, to try and bring it out in drama or perhaps in history even. And so I think it's so important that children are experiencing writing and the freedom to write, because it's not the same as maths. It's not 2 + 2 = 4. Creative writing is organic. It's always changing. It's always moving, and it depends on who you are and your life experiences as to how you try and write creatively. Some people, I visit lots of schools, some people have no experience of creative writing. They've never done it. And others, they've been really encouraged and somehow have found the time to do it. So I think it's really important to a child's development, but it's actually really important to a young adult's development. Even if you're only writing down a stream of consciousness, like writing down your thoughts without any order or any sense, it's so helpful for your mental health. And the way I describe it is, you've got the contents of your head, you're shaking it and you're spilling it out onto the page, so that if you are struggling with anything and you're trying to process something, getting it out onto the page is a really freeing way to sort of experience writing without any rules. It doesn't matter if it's not beautifully polished sentences, and it doesn't matter about punctuation. You can be as free and as loose and creative as you want to be. And as the further we seem to move up through the classroom, the less time and space there is to do that. And so I always encourage people, if they can, carve 5-10 minutes out of their day to just empty their head onto the contents of a page. You can screw it up and chuck it away. You don't have to show it to anyone, but you are writing creatively. And I think a lot of people are really intimidated by creative writing and think they don't know how to do it, but they're comparing themselves to an author who's been writing for 20 years and has an editor to make their writing better for them. So I think there should be less rules about it and a space carved out. If you can't get it in the classroom, carve it out in your own life.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Then another question. So talking now more like specifically about your recent book, I Spy, how would you say you approached the research for it, and did you dive into any real life espionage stories?
Well, I wrote I Spy because of real life espionage stories. So my great aunt, so my mum's aunt, Audrey, was a codebreaker at Bletchley Park. And because she'd been made to sign the Official Secrets Act, she kept the secret for most of her life. So when you sign the Official Secrets Act, particularly in World War II, she was 17 years old. The thought of the punishment that waited for her if she broke the Official Secrets Act meant that she kept that secret for such a long time, and she sort of drilled herself into the habit of not talking about it. So if you broke the Official Secrets Act, you could end up in prison for 30 years, you could be shot by firing squad, or you could be hung. And as a 17-year-old girl, she would have been absolutely terrified by that. So we didn't find out that she was at Bletchley Park, let alone a code breaker, until quite late on in her life. Her husband died not knowing. She had 2 children. They were about 50 when they found out. She had grandchildren. And the information had been declassified. So there were films made about Bletchley, there were books written, plays, etc. So she knew the information was out there, but she still didn't want to talk about it. And something was let slip one day in a pub, and the whole family were gobsmacked that she'd been at Bletchley Park. And it was like trying to get blood out of a stone to get more information out of her, because she was a really closed book about that time. But we did get out of her that she was a Japanese codebreaker. So she was sent from Bletchley to Bedford. She was given a crash course in Japanese. She was sent back to Bletchley. And then later on in the war, she ended up in London doing espionage, doing all kinds of secret activities, which she wouldn't really tell us very much about. So my book, I Spy, was massively inspired by my family and the family secrets, and our connection with Bletchley. And then I went with my daughter when she was in year 6, so she's 17 now, and I went as a parent helper and was just sort of blown away by Bletchley Park and how hands-on it is and interactive, and how many different types of stories and secrets and myths and legends lurked in that place.
Wow. Since we're talking about I Spy, I had a question. What support or techniques did you use to support dyslexic readers?
So with Ned, who's the boy in I Spy, he is dyslexic, and dyslexia wasn't a label that we used in the 1930s, 1940s. So his dad assumes that Ned is not working hard enough, that he's lazy, that he isn't sort of using as much of his brain as he could to help him solve problems, to do well in school. And obviously Ned doesn't know what dyslexia is either. So I turned to my own 2 sons who both are dyslexic, and their dyslexia presents in really different ways. So I would talk to them about character names, for example. So when you look at this character name, for example, Ned, can you easily read that name? Does it sound like it's spelt? So that if you're a dyslexic reader, it's really easy to look at that character name, which you're going to be looking at over and over and over. And I would try out other character names, and one of my sons would go, no, that's not going to work at all. I can't even see how to say that. So it was really helpful to have dyslexic children in the house when I was writing it, because I wrote quite a lot of it during lockdown. And then obviously my work in skills at Stowe and working as an SEN teacher means that I'm around people with dyslexia a lot. So we often advise dyslexic readers to turn to audio. So I was really keen that I Spy, Hide and Seek and the new one, Wink Murder, all be audiobooks, so that a lot of my dyslexic readers turn to the audio version and read it alongside the print version. So that's been really satisfying for me as a mum of dyslexics, but also as a teacher of dyslexics, to make sure that the text is accessible. So I kept my chapters quite short. I made sure the chapters all ended on a cliffhanger, so that encourages you to want to read on. And I tried to make sure that the vocabulary I used was vocabulary that you're reaching for. You want to broaden your vocabulary, but it's not intimidating. It's not going to confuse or put off a reader. So it's a kind of a juggling act. You're trying to please and cater for lots of different people.
Okay. Can you share any insights into your upcoming projects or what readers can expect next from you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm allowed to talk about it now. So it's been announced. So book 3 is called Wink Murder. I don't have anything to show you because I haven't got a physical copy of the book yet. I think it's just going to the printers right now. But it is inspired by my great aunt Audrey. So it follows one of the main characters from I Spy. So it follows Mary here. And she is sent to Bedford, where she's taught a crash course in Japanese, just like my great aunt. And then she's sent back to Bletchley, and then she's sent on to the Ritz in London. So I found out when I was doing lots of research that when we captured German prisoners of war in Britain, we put some of them in the Tower of London, and they were taken for days out into London, and they were taken to the Ritz, where they were wined and dined and given this most luxurious experience. And I remember thinking, why would you do that with your enemy at the time? Why would you do that with a prisoner of war? My granddad was a prisoner of war. He was a paratrooper, and he was a prisoner of war in Poland, and he was treated in a completely the opposite way. He was treated really, really badly and escaped 3 times. So I did more research, and I found out that there was a group of people called the Secret Listeners who had tapped and bugged certain locations that they would take the enemy to. And then the enemy would talk in their native language. And we had intelligence people, we had linguistics, and other teams of Secret Service agents who were listening in on those conversations and gathering intelligence. And the intelligence that the Secret Listeners accumulated is said to have shortened the war by 2 to 4 years in a similar way that the intelligence that we gathered at Bletchley did. So I've sort of brought those 2 worlds together in Wink Murder. And the scenarios that I've created are based on events that really did actually happen. And Winston Churchill signed off on it all until he saw the bill from the Ritz, and then he was horrified that we were spending so much money on prisoners of war. But it was worth it because of the intelligence that was sort of gleaned from those luxurious 5-course meals.
I have a question about the Arts Council England grant. Since you successfully won it twice, could you please tell us about the process for like applying for that grant? Because I can imagine that's quite competitive.
It's so competitive. It's ridiculous, and it's really time consuming, but it's enormously helpful. So for example, I think the first one I won, I was able to take a year off teaching and a year off school visits, and I just stayed at home and I wrote a novel, and I wrote probably double the length that I actually needed to. I ended up cutting almost like 60,000 words, but my productivity was enormous. I was writing 5,000 words a day, whereas I'm lucky if, you know, I write 1,000 words in a sitting currently. So it was really beneficial in that I could just concentrate on writing. I didn't have to worry about income and juggling lots of different jobs. So it's a luxury. And then I won another one again for I Spy, and that was enormously beneficial because I was writing a lot of I Spy in lockdown, so I couldn't go to Bletchley Park and do research. So I used a lot of the Arts Council money to be able to buy books and do research in different ways. And again, it's having someone put faith in your writing and put money behind the faith in your writing and really invest in you as a writer and give you the time to not have to worry about your income. But it is really complicated and it's really time consuming. So you have to be really convinced that, you know, this is worth your while as the artist, if you like, because it's not just writing that they fund all kinds of different projects, and of course everybody wants to win. So I have put in bids where I haven't won, and you know, where the feedback has been, your project is fantastic, but there was another project that we felt was better or different, or we chose it for unknown reasons. So it must be really challenging being on the Arts Council and having to select, you know, one project when you want to give money to many. So I've been really privileged to win it twice. I didn't realise you could enter again. I thought it was just a one-off thing. So they actively encourage you to, you know, keep going, have more goes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking the questions.
And we're done.